This is not a joke. You know what the Joint Chiefs told us the greatest threat facing America was? Global warming.
In the FBI's view, the top domestic violent extremist threat comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocated for the superiority of the white race.
Terrorism from white supremacy is the most lethal threat to the homeland today. Not ISIS, not Al-Qaeda. We've taken steps to acknowledge and address systemic racism and the scourge of white supremacy in our own country. Yes, forcing us to confront systemic racism and white supremacy. Our soul will be troubled as long as systemic racism is allowed to persist.
Yes, white supremacy is America's biggest problem. And as we've noted many times before, we still don't know, despite fervent and sincere efforts to find out, what a white supremacist is. The White House has not told us. They have refused. So as of tonight, that remains a term without definition. But for some perspective, more people die in this country every year from lightning strikes, literally. Look it up. So no.
I've seen for myself how the original sin of slavery weaved white supremacy into our founding documents and principles. It's the white supremacy that led to the senseless killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many other Black Americans. That's why the Biden administration has made racial equity a top priority across the entire government.
Communities across the country to ensure that they have funding to get more community police around the country, something that was supported by the American Jobs Plan, that was voted into law by Democrats just a couple of months ago. Some might say that the other party was for defunding the police. I'll let others say that. But some might say that the other party was for defunding the police. I'll let others say that. But some might say that the other party was for defunding the police. I'll let others say that. But
and I will never stop saying, not only do we need to disinvest in police, but we need to completely dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department.
So yes, defund your butts. Defund you. Take that money that we're using for MRAPs.
Yes, I support a radical reimagining of community safety and public safety, which means reallocating and not further investing in a carceral state.
Some might say that the other party was for defunding the police. I'll let others say that. But
the 1/6 attack for the future of the country is a profoundly more dangerous event than the 9/11 attacks. And in the end, the 1/6 attacks are likely to kill a lot more Americans than were killed on the 9/11 attacks, which will include the casualties of the wars that lasted 20 years following it.
That attack on the Capitol, white supremacy and patriarchy are very linked in a lot of ways. There's a lot of sexualizing of that violence. And I didn't think that I was just going to be killed. I thought other things were going to happen to me as well.
So what sounds like what you're telling me right now is that you didn't only think that you were going to die, you thought you were going to be raped.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would have foreseen an insurrection incited by the President of the United States.
We all know there needs to be a thorough and honest accounting of what took place on January 6th, the greatest attempted insurrection since the Civil War.
We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole. Since the Civil War. The Confederates, back then, never breached the Capitol, as insurrectionists did on January the 6th. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
But you can still see the similarities. During the Civil War, more than 500,000 people were shot to death. On January 6th, one person was shot to death, and she turned out to be an unarmed Trump voter gunned down without explanation by the Capitol Hill police. But other than that, basically the same thing.
It's one thing for literally criminals to break through cordon, go into the Capitol, kill a police officer, and be held unaccountable, and it is for people objecting and marching on the Capitol and saying, you are not allowing me to speak freely. You are not allowing me to do A, B, C, or D. And so they're very different criteria.
We have people scaling the Capitol, hitting the Capitol Police with lead pipes across the head, and we can't get bipartisanship. If we're going to take on China, if we're going to rebuild the country, if we're going to reverse climate change, we need two political parties in this country that are both living in reality, and you ain't one of them.
Modern science obviously recognizes that there are many more than two biological sexes. In fact, there are 6.
We need two political parties in this country that are both living in reality.
Hi everyone, my name is Bunny. I use bun pronouns. I identify as gender fey. What does being gender fey mean? Gender fey is a type of non-binary gender fluid identity that ranges between agender and feminine with no feelings of masculinity. There is no single set point, it can move around.
We need two political parties in this country that are both living in reality.
And, you know, President Biden, politically speaking, is not going into this meeting with a great hand of cards either. You know, Russians are seeing exactly what we're seeing, the voter suppression laws, the, you know, slide toward minority rule, the undermining of our own democracy. So it is a lot harder to talk to, you know, we're seeing black men being killed, black men and women being killed by police constantly in this country. So it is a lot harder to talk to Vladimir Putin about human rights when, you know, we still haven't cleaned up our mess at home.
If all of your political opponents are dead, in prison, poisoned, doesn't that send a message that you do not want a fair political fight?
As for who is killing whom or throwing whom in jail, people came to the U.S. Congress with political demands. 400 people. Over 400 people had criminal charges placed on them. They face prison sentences of up to 20, maybe even 25 years. They're being called domestic terrorists. They're being accused of a number of other crimes. 70 of them were arrested right away after the events, and 30 of them are still under arrest. It's unclear on what grounds. And as for nobody from the official authorities has informed us about it. Some people died, and one of the people that died, that was simply shot on the spot by the police, although they were not threatening the police with any weapons. In many countries, the same thing happens.
Is that we're actually seeing a decline in homicides and shootings. Yes, sir. Sir, crime is not out of control in our city. In fact, crime is on the decline. All of our major indices showed a decline in crime, and our homicides and our shootings year over year are down. That's a fact, sir. Crime is not out of control in our city. In fact, crime is on the decline. All of our major indices showed a decline in crime, and our homicides and our shootings year over year are down. That's a fact, sir.
Actually, crime is down. Gun violence and murder rates are up.
Through mid-March, more than 370 carjackings reported in Chicago. Crime data showed the most carjackings Chicago has seen in a 3-month period in at least 20 years, maybe much longer. But it's not just Chicago. This is happening everywhere. As we advance toward a full year of mourning the death of a single man on the sidewalk in Minneapolis, thousands of Americans have been murdered thanks to the policy changes justified by the death of that man. Ponder that for a minute. Has there ever been a more perverse moment in this country?
Well, I'm glad to join my colleagues in introducing the Judiciary Act of 2021 to establish the Supreme Court size as 13. And it also will enable us to do justice and to rectify the great injustice that was done in packing the court. And some people will say we're packing the court. We're not packing it, we're unpacking it. Senator McConnell and the Republicans packed the court over the last couple of years, as Senator Markey outlined.
When I talk about infrastructure, it means if a mom and dad are going to work, they have the right to know that their kids are in decent childcare. That's infrastructure. Infrastructure is having the best educated workforce in the world. That means all of our kids should have the ability to get a higher education, not leave school deeply in debt. It means that we need a healthy society. Our life expectancy is 40th in the world because we are the only major country not to guarantee health care to all people. So I think as a nation, we've got to take a very broad look at what we mean by infrastructure. It's physical infrastructure, obviously, bricks and mortar. It is human infrastructure.
But a very prominent former U.S. commander who said there are elements of the GOP that are starting to look like the jihadists that he used to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, spreading lies and conspiracy theories to radicalize a population. This was a very serious four-star commander who said that the GOP is starting to look like jihadists, and someone who I think, has personal conservative views. That's the environment that we're in. So there's no question this was an attack of domestic terrorism. And I worry similarly about the continuing radicalization of the electorate. And if you go back and look in time, and I say this as a counterterrorism guy, if you look in time at terrorism movements, they don't start usually immediately with violence. They usually start with a political grievance that leaders say cannot be solved through peaceful means. And then they move to violence. So after Trump started to propagate the big lie in November, a lot of us in the national security community said what he's doing is actually tilling the fertile soil for extremists to pop up later on. In fact, we saw it as a ticking time bomb for an increase in domestic terrorism. And I think over the next 2 years, you are going to see that. You are going to see the spike in cases, and you're going to see that because radicalized elements of the Republican Party now represent a bigger threat to our democracy than organizations like Al-Qaeda or ISIS ever did.
Let me go there. DHS is now concerned about a new conspiracy theory, a new Trump-inspired, Trump-incited kind of rage, white rage, to use the words of General Milley yesterday, among extremist communities. And he said department officials are highly concerned about it because it fuels the false narrative that the election was rigged, and that's a narrative that may trigger a violent response from extremists. The disgraced, twice impeached ex-presidents' utterances are now a national security threat on an hourly, daily basis.
I think if you're a believer in this conspiracy and you've seen everything from QAnon to January 6th, the inauguration occurring, the ballot recounts failing, and you still are pursuing this fantasy that the biggest risk to the country isn't actually, from outside the country. It's not even necessarily from inside the country, but from the last person that was inside the White House.
For make no mistake, bullies and merchants of fear, peddlers of lies, are threatening the very foundation of our country. The big lie is just that, a big lie.
74,243 mail-in ballots where there is no clear record of them being sent. And so we have 74,000 where we have them came back from individuals where we don't have a clear indication that they were ever sent out to them.
The big lie is just that, a big lie.
So for example, we have 11,326 people that did not show up on a November 7th version of the voter rolls that should have been after votes were cast, but then appeared on the December 4th voter rolls. And just to be clear, they show as voted in this past election, but they were not a November 7th version of the file, and they did show up on the December 4th version.
Is there a logical explanation why that would be?
I cannot think of a logical explanation on what that would be, but it'd be a great thing to hear back from the county to see if there's anything that we're not thinking of.
The big lie is just that, a big lie.
Roughly 20,000, I think it was about actually closer to 18,000, who voted in the election and then showed as being removed from the voter rolls soon after the election. So they were on the voter rolls, they showed as voted, and then they were removed. And there could be a good logical explanation for that, but it seems like a large number to immediately have after an election be removed.
Don't get the vaccine, you can't go to the supermarket. Don't have the vaccine, you don't show it, can't go to the ball game. Don't have the vaccine, can't go to work. You don't have the vaccine, can't come here. No shirt, no shoes, no service. That's where I think we should be right now, because we continue to waste our breath on people who are just not going to change. They're, you know, the circular logic. They just keep going back and saying, well, it's my freedom, it's whatever.
President Biden did accuse social media platforms of killing people. Do you think conservative media, like Fox News, are doing the same? Are they killing people too with rhetoric like you just heard?
Today, I issued a Surgeon General's advisory on the dangers of health misinformation. Surgeon General advisories are reserved for urgent public health threats. And while those threats have often been related to what we eat, drink, and smoke, today we live in a world where misinformation poses an imminent and insidious threat to our nation's health. The truth is that misinformation takes away our freedom to make informed decisions about our health and the health of our loved ones. During the COVID-19 pandemic, health misinformation has led people to resist wearing masks in high-risk settings. It's led them to turn down proven treatments and to choose not to get vaccinated. This has led to avoidable illnesses and death. Simply put, health information has cost us lives.
And the problem we're seeing that our Surgeon General elevated just last week is that disinformation traveling through a range of mediums. Some of them are a range of social media platforms. Some of them are media. Some of them are through the mouths of public officials. That bad information, inaccurate information about vaccines is killing people.
We have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these huge audiences. There are people on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN, and they are extremely radical and pushing extremely radical views. And so it's up to the Facebooks and YouTubes in particular to think about whether or not they want to be effectively cable networks for disinformation. And then we're going to have to figure out the OANN and Newsmax problem. You know, that these companies have freedom of speech, but I'm not sure we need Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, and such to be bringing them into tens of millions of homes. This is, you know, allowing people to seek out information if they really want to, but not pushing it into their faces, I think is where we're going to have to go here.
It's a national emergency. You have corporations and people that are profiting off of lies and conspiracy theories, whether that's big tech, whether that's Fox News, whether that's the TV providers that beam OAN and Newsmax into homes, or Rush Limbaugh. There are a lot of people profiting off of lies and conspiracy theories, and I don't really see how things get better, how we move on as a country until this informational environment is cleaned up.
First, we are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. Given, as Dr. Murthy conveyed, this is a big issue of misinformation, specifically on the pandemic. In terms of actions, Alex, that we have taken, or we're working to take, I should say, from the federal government, we've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation. We're working with doctors and medical professionals to connect to connected medical experts who are popular with their audiences with accurate information and boost trusted content. There are also proposed changes that we have made to social media platforms, including Facebook, and those specifically are 4 key steps. One, that they measure and publicly share the impact of misinformation on their platform. Second, that we have proposed that they create a robust enforcement strategy that bridges their properties and provides transparency about the rules. So I think this was a question asked before, there's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation on social media platforms. All of them remain active on Facebook, despite some even being banned on other platforms, including Facebook, ones that Facebook owns. You shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there.
It's hard to overstate what a momentous change this is. It means, among other things, that private property no longer exists in the United States. You thought you owned your home. Not anymore. Rochelle Walensky does. She'll decide who can live there, under what circumstances, and for how long. Is this a good idea? Of course not. It's totalitarian. But But there's an even more pressing question at the center of this, a principle that defines what kind of country this is and what kind of country it will be going forward. And the question is this: where did Rochelle Walensky get the power to do this, to suspend private property rights in America? And the answer is, she simply asserted the power. Walensky claims she had the authority and no one stopped her from exercising. And that means that an unelected college professor you'd never heard of 6 months ago is now in charge of your country. If you're wondering how all of this can possibly be legal, rest assured that it's not legal. It's not even arguably legal. We know that for a fact. The Supreme Court has just ruled on this specific question. The court found that the CDC does not have the right to institute a nationwide eviction moratorium. Period. Only Congress can do that. Now, the court didn't make us guess on their view of this. The court put this in writing in the clearest possible language. There's no debate about that. The Biden administration just ignored what the court said. I don't buy that the CDC can't extend the eviction moratorium, Waters wrote on Twitter, perfectly aware, as she did, that the Supreme Court has already prohibited this. Who's going to stop them? Who's going to penalize them? Well, good question. Nobody. And Nancy Pelosi knows that, too. Pelosi knows that what Rochelle Walensky just did is illegal by definition. She also understands that openly ignoring a Supreme Court ruling will mean the end of our current system. And that's fine with Nancy Pelosi. Quote, the CDC has the power to extend the eviction moratorium, Pelosi said. Pelosi didn't explain where that power might come from. She simply declared that it exists, as dictators do. Keep in mind that even Joe Biden, who knows very little, knows that what his administration has just done is against the law. He said that on camera yesterday. In other words, it's illegal. The people doing it are criminals. That's the word we use for people who knowingly break the law.
That's why the Biden administration has made racial equity a top priority across the entire government.